When it comes to conventional warfare, Russia is a fluke. Russia is an imposter who wanted everybody to believe that, they are a strong army. In reality, they were proved to be weak, corrupt, disorganized, drunk, and all sorts. We're not giving up on Donald Trump yet. I think he is beginning to realize Russian aggression against Ukraine is not something that will just go away without his participation. This tragic war has put us very firmly on the global defense industry map, and it is up to us now to capitalize this.
4 years into Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine is still standing, and Russia still hasn't reached its main goals. The war has turned into a tough, drone-heavy fight with a little movement on the front. Talks continue, but trust is still absent, and NATO is already studying Ukraine's battlefield to understand future war. So where does this war really stand today? And has Russia already failed strategically? I'm here in the studio with Yuriy Sak, former advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense. Yuriy, welcome to the studio, to Channel 24, and we have a lot to unpack today, so let's dive in.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yuriy, it's been 4 years of a full-scale invasion of Russia, and they still haven't reached any goals in Ukraine. Not in 3 days, not in 4 years, and more than 11 years. So how would you describe the front line current right now, and do you see that Russia has failed strategically already?
Well, absolutely. I think Russia has failed by now abjectly, and I think it is obvious to everyone, because we probably need to measure success by the correspondence between the objectives that they have voiced in February 2022, 4 years ago, and with what they have achieved by now. And they have achieved nothing. They have not denazified Ukraine. They have not demilitarized Ukraine. They have not made NATO smaller. Moreover, they have made NATO stronger and bigger, because there were 2 new members joined since. I think, when tomorrow comes and we will be marking the 4th anniversary of this large-scale invasion, for us Ukrainians, it's a very tragic day. I don't know in my immediate circle anyone who has not been affected by this war, but we all have something to be proud of. We are still here, we're still standing, we still inspire the world with our resilience and our heroism. And I think the story for the Russian people is absolutely opposite. It's a failure, it's a disgrace, it's a shame, and there is no way they can even with their propaganda, no way they can somehow explain it away.
Yuriy, after 4 years of a full-scale invasion, Russia has lost enormous number of people, dead and wounded, and equipment. Who's taking advantage right now on the battlefield?
At the moment, we are in a very tough war of attrition stage. I think overall, if we look at the statements of our general staff and our military and political leadership, the ratio is to our advantage. It doesn't mean to say that the situation is easy on the front lines, by no means. We still sustain, losses and casualties, and it's very difficult for Ukrainian armed forces. But the price in terms of manpower and equipment that the Russians are paying for every square kilometer, of which 300 they have just lost, as we have seen. So the ratio is really not in their favor, because at the moment they are actually recruiting less people to the army than they are losing. At this rate, and if we think back a few weeks ago, where the newly appointed Minister of Defense, Mr. Fedorov, said that his and ours plan is to reach the target of 50,000 killed or wounded, Russians a month. This seems like a strategy to turn this war of attrition to our favor. But for the time being, the front line is pretty much frozen. Russians have attempted some attacks locally. They still continue to do them. We have reports and intelligence that they are planning to do more of these offensive attacks in Zaporizhia, for example, region come spring. But for the time being, it's a frozen front line with a very, very vast kill zone.
Sometimes when I'm reading Western analysts, and they are saying that some front line is frozen, it's not very active, it's not moving, but we know that everything is much more complex. So what is the biggest challenges right now militarily Ukraine is facing that West should understand about us and should know?
We've always been very open with our partners in the West. Since, I can't remember exactly, but probably April 2022, when the first Ramstein meeting took place, we put forward our requirements very openly, and we don't hold back any information from our partners, so they have access to the information from the battlefield, and they know very well the requirements of the Ukrainian armed forces. They have always been lagging behind, and I've seen a number of discussions now running up to the 4th anniversary of the invasion, and all experts agree, both in Ukraine and beyond, that the West has always been 2 steps behind. We would always receive stuff that we would request, but with delays. So fast forward to today, and of course the major challenge, and it's been voiced by President Zelensky recently at Davos, Munich, in other interviews, of course air defense systems and air defense missiles, because this seems to be the dominant strategy of the Russians now. They want to destroy our energy infrastructure in hope that this will somehow sway Ukrainian people towards being more agreeable in the negotiating process.
Right.
So air defense, but of course there are other issues like, it's a very dynamic modern warfare with a very fast feedback cycle and innovation cycle, right? So whichever side comes up with a new technology, the other side takes 2-3 weeks, there's a countermeasure, and so it's a fast cycle that requires components, that requires booming and fast developing defense industry, which is something Ukraine is working very hard on. So yes, it's air defenses, technological advances, and defense industry partnering with our Western European countries in particular.
And now I'm reading, well, that's a fact. It's not that I'm reading. The fact is that drones have changed this war significantly. Does it mean that actually it's easier for both sides, for Ukraine and our Russian enemy, to spot and attack a target on the distance rather than just to make some movements on the front line, to move?
Well, absolutely. That's why the tactics have changed on both sides, and we're seeing that, for example, Russians, instead of, they still do these meat grinder attacks, but they're moving in smaller groups, the tactics of small infiltration, exactly because of the drones, because of the kill zone, which is now, 10-15 kilometers, and the time lapse between the enemy moving and detected by reconnaissance drones to the moment when those mobile groups are struck is very small. So that renders impossible large-scale advancements, and that's why what we're seeing is, a tug of war back and forth of small mobile groups, position war, trying to gain control of smaller parts and then expand these areas of control. But that's still, if you take a helicopter view, it's still a frozen front line with a positional warfare.
Russia has broken all the promises for the last decades and hundreds of years to Ukraine, and it's doing the same to the West right now. Yuriy, why we still see Washington so eager to make any agreement with Putin, even when they know that Russia will not keep any promises?
It's very hard to read Donald Trump's mind, but I have just had a meeting actually yesterday with one of the very renowned Western journalists, and we had this discussion, and we both agreed with that we're not giving up on Donald Trump yet, because he does have this out of the deal thing going, and of course, from where we see it, it seems like he's more willing to apply pressure on Ukraine than on Russia. But I think he is beginning to realize that Ukraine, or rather Russian aggression against Ukraine, is not something that will just go away without his participation. It is not a situation that he can just allow to blow over. Even if he wanted, right? And of course, we have the midterm elections coming up in autumn. And Donald Trump is a man with a huge ego, and he doesn't want to be seen as weak. And he doesn't want to be seen as his predecessor, and he doesn't want to be blamed for, the things that the previous administration experienced when they were withdrawing from Afghanistan. So the reason why I think the Americans are still pushing hard with the negotiating process, while they understand that Russia is just playing with them and just trying to buy time, is because they still haven't come up with a solution. They just don't have any idea how to actually, because what they're seeing by now is this. They see that the Ukrainians wouldn't budge, right? They have tried to scare us, to frighten us. And look, one thing this winter actually has shown is, unfortunately, and it's almost tragically, but this winter, which is probably the coldest winter in more than a decade, it's a winter of incessant Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and power grids. So this winter has shown, unfortunately, that this war can go on in this format for a very, very long time. We have not broken, Russians have not achieved their goals, so we can be stuck in this quagmire of modern warfare mixed with some attrition World War I elements for a very long time. Americans understand that. Americans understand that they don't have the leverage. So my personal conspiracy theory is that if Americans want to achieve something in these negotiations, they have to work with China. Because China is the country that holds the key that can unlock this peace process and move it forward in a meaningful way.
So only having a Beijing as an alliance, will have a leverage?
Well, it's not possible to have Beijing as an alliance.
Okay, that's a strong word.
It's not possible to kind of sit them down at the table.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that that's where the solution probably is.
Okay.
Because, for instance, we know very well that Russia is also, like us, is scaling up their defense industry, right? They're producing en masse missiles, drones, and everything. Now, they're able to do that because they get the machinery, for example, from China. They're able to do that because they get components that China supplies to them through either Thailand or, other sort of friendly countries. So, and of course, China is one of the biggest buyers of Russian energy sources. So, if the US found a way to somehow convince China that it's in their interest to exert more pressure on Russia, maybe that will give us a better chance of succeeding in the peace talks.
How would you connect MAGA, Make America Great Again, with the outcome of Russia's war in Ukraine?
Well, we have to probably, MAGA plus make MAGA plus America first. And plus, we want to not be involved in global wars as before. But then at the same time, we want Greenland, Canada, and other parts of the world, Venezuela. So it's a very hazy geopolitical outlook that is currently in the White House. This is why it's very difficult to read. It's could call this strategic ambiguity, which is a sort of murky ecosystem in which it is very difficult to predict their next move, which gives them advantage, of course. But I don't think America, and it's not just my opinion, it's I think a wide consensus in Europe, in the US, it's a bipartisan actually consensus that if America loses the freedom war that Ukraine is fighting against Russia, it will lose its status as, the leader of free world and as a superpower. So it's these two things, MAGA and Russia's aggression against Ukraine, are intrinsically interconnected. And I think the White House is beginning to see that. Because remember, look, at the beginning, there were times when Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, they all used to almost fleetingly say, well, if these negotiations don't work out, we'll walk away. We'll just walk away. Well, now they still haven't walked away. And the reason is because they understand that the world is looking. China is looking as how America will, because America is in the ring now. China is not in the ring, but China is getting ready. So it will be a sort of chain reaction. If, God forbid, this will never happen because of us Ukrainians, but if the Americans don't succeed in kind of leading the way in this process, they will lose their positions globally, and that will have a knock-on effect, and it will not be good for America.
Well, yes, Yuri, but United States, they're still in a diplomacy track, but they're stepping back from military support for Ukraine. And for the last year, in 2025, their military support dropped to 90%, so maybe like 0% they left, 10% they left. So doesn't it look contradictory to you? They are choosing this way, but they are not choosing military support.
Nataliia, I will again say that I tend to view this through this prism of strategic ambiguity, because while on the one hand it is true what you've just said, that the numerical measurement of their support has dropped. At the same time, just recently we have seen, and of course this cannot be attributed to the US White House administration, but we have seen that there were certain movements by the US in terms of Starlink technology that kind of gave us advantage. So that's asymmetric. That's not sort of direct help, in terms of, not like the help that you can receive in Rzeszów airport and load it up on platforms and bring it to Ukraine in terms of weapons or funds. But is it helping us? It is. Are we still using their intelligence? We are. Are the Americans selling weapons to Ukraine through European countries? They are. So, it's probably not an ideal scenario for us, but look, we're still standing 4 years on, and we are resilient.
Recently, Ukrainian president, he gave the interview to BBC saying that Putin has already started the World War III. Do you see that way? And do you see that the West is seeing that as well, that way?
Well, it's again, from the realm of political philosophy and forecasting, but of course, some people say that the Third World War began in 2014 when Putin annexed Crimea, because that was the trigger that kind of set in motion processes which resulted to the invasion in 2022, and we're still reaping the fruits of that annexation in 2014. Now, at the same time, I know from my conversation, for example, with the Europeans, they also believe that this is the first kind of harbinger of the Third World War, and that's why the Europeans are actually waking up to the reality, and they're beginning to take seriously so many things that they were taking for granted before this large-scale invasion began, and before the US has shown their willingness to step aside in a way. Europeans see it as a possible beginning of something bigger if it is mismanaged at this stage. And of course, for the Europeans, it's better that Ukraine fights this war and kind of ends it than it spills over. So that's why there is a lot more partnership now between Ukrainian and European defense industries. You see the news every second day about new joint ventures between our drone producers, interceptor producers. There are, funds allocated to Ukrainian weapons industry through initiatives such as Danish model, manufacturing freedom. So we're not there yet. I wouldn't call it myself Third World War, but we are at the doorstep of this Third World War, and whether we will walk through that door or not depends on how the parties act in the next, foreseeable future, 6 to 12 months.
Speaking about European help and the Pure program, do you think that Ukraine can sustain this scale and pace of the war right now in the future with the help of Europe and considering the Pure program?
Simple answer is yes, because we have been in very tough situations before. Just think about the period when there was this bipartisan Ukraine support bill in the US. It was stuck there for almost half a year, and everybody was freaking out and panicking of what's going to happen. President Zelensky, I think when he gave one of the interviews in that period, and he was asked whether Ukraine will survive, whether Ukrainians will survive, he replied, they will, but not everyone. So, the arrangements which are now in place, like Pearl Initiative, I mean, I've actually heard different opinions. So I've heard people, some top-level people very skeptical about this, but skeptical as in they think that it's not working as efficiently as it should, this Pearl Initiative. But then there is some progress anyway, so, it's kind of trickle kind of support. And a more important question, an interesting question to consider is this slowness and sluggishness on the part of our Western partners, is this a bug or a feature? And in my conspiracy theory world, I believe this is more a feature than a bug.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, because, look, when this invasion began, it caught off guard everybody, not just us. So something impossible happened, something nobody thought was ever conceivable, that Russia as a nuclear power would go with an all-out war against its neighbor whom it regarded as a friend for such a long time. So this was inconceivable. And as a result, Western leaders, the US leaders, everybody was sort of lost and not understanding how to deal with this monster of a situation. And of course, in situations when we humans have doubts about how to approach a solution to a certain problem, we tend to procrastinate and, delay the moment when we will finally have to take that solution. So that's why, we as a country, we have been receiving sufficient help so that we don't fall, because nobody's interested in our fall, because everybody is afraid that if we fall, then it will spill over to the West. But at the same time, we've never been given support and aid sufficient for us to actually deal a stronger blow to Russia.
Everybody's talking about the security guarantees. And recently, the former UK Prime Minister and a friend of Ukraine, a supporter of Ukraine, Boris Johnson, he said, why don't we send our military deployment right now, our soldiers? But the key issue is they're going to send it. If they're going to send it, it's going to be after the peace agreement. After going to sign some peace agreement between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. In this case, why Moscow should sign anything if they will know that after this there will be a British or Norwegian soldiers on Ukrainian soil? Yeah.
Well, look, it's a bit of a trap that we all may fall into, because we begin to discuss certain elements of this peace process and spend time and effort doing so, while we actually deep inside understand that the prospects of this peace process leading anywhere is actually very, very, very minimum. So in the current setup, the discussions of these security guarantees, and we were informed as a society, as international community, we were all informed that the parties have reached certain understanding of how this can be monitored when the ceasefire is achieved. But that's inconsequential in light of the fact that the main points are still irreconcilable. So we can come up with whatever post-ceasefire setup, and it will only be talk and theater, right? So for as long as these main issues, the presence of Russian troops in Donbass area, our impossibility for Ukraine to withdraw our troops from Donbass. So as long as these issues are there, any discussion of possible security guarantees is just a sideshow for the main show, which is not going very well.
But could you imagine Western military support, Western military boots on Ukrainian ground? That would stop Russia immediately.
Well, look, at this stage, it is very important for us, from the point of view of our negotiating leverage, to have these partners say that, right? So, because it kind of signals to Russia the resolve. It signals to Russia, and look, Russia has come up with counter-offers, right? They said, well, let's have North Korean troops supervising the peace agreement or ceasefire agreement, or the Chinese troops. So it's all part of this negotiating game. But for us, it is important. And look, it is actually, well, not a breakthrough, but a great change of rhetoric on the part of our Western allies, because a year ago they were very, very reluctant to actually admit the possibility of deploying their troops. And now they say it out loud, which I think somehow strengthens our negotiating position.
Absolutely. Russia was picturing itself as a second world army, a modern army. It was lying to the world for decades. What the biggest lie about Russia's army Ukraine has revealed for the last 4 years?
At this stage, 4 years into the large-scale invasion, it actually doesn't matter, and I will explain why. Of course, the first year and a half of the large-scale invasion exposed Russia as a paper tiger, as a country that boasted one of the strongest military in the world. They would pride themselves on these military parades that they would hold, like show off these super technological weapons systems. And then they got stuck outside of Kyiv, and they were thrown out from Kyiv and Kyiv region, and they failed miserably and left Kharkiv, and they were thrown out of part of Kherson region. So for Western military observers and analysts, of course, this signaled a very simple message, that Russia, when it comes to conventional warfare, Russia is a fluke. Russia is an imposter who wanted everybody to believe that, you know, they are a strong army. In reality, they were proved to be weak, corrupt, disorganized, drunk, and all sorts. But this was then. If we look at the situation right now, you know, it would be a mistake on our part to underestimate our enemy, because unfortunately they are learning as well. And if we look at, for example, you know, how far they have progressed in terms of modern warfare, in terms of drone technologies, in terms of electronic warfare technologies, which was actually always their strong side, you know, we have to look at them as a strong enemy, because that's the only way we can actually withstand their attacks. So, yes, we have told the world the story about Russia being a paper tiger and a weak army, but at the same time, today, we're in a different situation. Russia, with the help of its friends, China, Iran, they are improving their methods of warfare, their systems of warfare, and unfortunately, we are experiencing that here in Ukraine, in Ukrainian cities, because we're seeing that, for example, just look at how their Shahed drones, how they have improved since the first one flew over Ukraine to the ones that we see now, you know, that Shahed drones that carry other drones. So a mother drone flying carries other drones. So let's not underestimate our enemy, but yes, we did expose Russia as a weak army before.
And the latest model of Geraň 5, it also includes American and German elements into it, which shows us that, well, Russia will always find a way to, you know, somehow overcome sanctions and get what they want. I mean, in terms of elements. Yeah, speaking about Russia as a paper tiger, a lot of analysts, Estonian intelligence, saying that they are producing weapon much more. They are producing much more weapon than they need against Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So, do you believe they are preparing some bigger war against one of the NATO's countries?
Well, yes. I think it's a dream that Putin personally has had for a very long time, because I think I think Putin is a maniac driven by this ambition to remedy the historical injustice as he sees it, right? So in his twisted and deranged worldview, what happened, like when Warsaw Pact fell apart, NATO should have been disassembled as well, and we would be living in a more just, as you would say, and fair world now. So yes, he's probably getting ready, but how realistic are these? I mean, look, I've spoken to military analysts, for example, from the Baltic states, and they are confident that it's just behind the corner. Now, there are other people who believe that this build-up of Russian defense capabilities is an intimidation measure. So they want the West to believe that they're ready to strike any moment, but in reality, they will not do that. Now, the best strategy for us and for our Western partners to, I think, adhere to at this stage is the ancient truism, Roman truism. You want war, prepare. You want peace, prepare for war. Civic pacem, para bellum. Right? That's the best we can get.
I think few more questions left. What is the biggest lesson the West have to learn about Russia's war in Ukraine and take into account?
I think the West has realized that unfortunately we have not reached the Fukuyama's end of history. We have not arrived at a point in the sort of civilizational timeline after which major wars will be impossible. That means that the Western allies in Europe and beyond, in Japan, for example, in Australia, they understand that unfortunately nobody can be reluctant and complacent, and we will continue to live in a world that will be ridden by risk. We will continue to live in a world in which democracy and freedom have to be defended. We cannot take for granted the situation that democracy is so omnipresent and omnipotent that it does not need to be defended. And that's, I think, the major lesson, which will result in more efficient military alliances worldwide, which will result in a new arms race, which has already begun. But it will send the message to the dictators and tyrannies that the West and this civilized hemisphere has woken up to reality. We will no longer be complacent. We will no longer be caught off guard. And hopefully that will stave off the possible future attacks from the tyrants.
Ukraine's military production is expanding very dramatically. Do you believe that Ukraine can produce as much weapon as needed for its own needs on the front line in the visible future?
The current ambition of our defense industry sector, which comprises around 700 defense companies, about 80 plus of which are state-owned and all the others are privately owned. And those 600 plus private-owned, in 2022, there were like 50. So what happened in terms of the evolution of Ukraine's defense industry is anything short of a miracle. And our partners understand that. And, you know, you will not find any meaningful discussion of defense industry and modern warfare anywhere in the world these days without lessons learned from Ukraine. How do Ukrainians do this? What kind of technology Ukrainians see that will dominate the battlefield in the future? So we are in a very sweet spot, and it's a tragedy. But as always, there's no good without bad, or there's no bad without good. So this tragic war has put us very firmly on the global defense industry map. And it is up to us now to capitalize this, right? When I was advisor to the Ministry of Strategic Industries, the motto was, we would appeal to our Western partners, help us build the arsenal of the free world here in Ukraine. And this is essentially what is happening. But whether we will be able to become fully self-sufficient, that was your question, whether we will be able to produce some positions, yes. Like, for example, drones, yes. But
air defense?
Air defense systems, no. And I think President Zelensky just yesterday said very openly that, and I know, look, I've met with missile producers from Australia who said to me, look, we, as in all of us, we need to find a way to convince the US producers to share the licenses, because it's like in pharmaceutical industry. There is a drug invented by some big global name, Novo Nordisk, but it's expensive. So what happens then? Novo Nordisk gives license to like smaller Indian companies, and they do an alternative, right? Mm-hmm. The experts and engineers, rocket science engineers, are confident that there could be substitutes, but they need to be licensed to us by the US primarily for Patriots and stuff, and then of course it is possible with the help of our partners. Plus, we have our own long-range missile program. We have achieved tremendous, outstanding results in terms of, for example, the production of self-propelled howitzers like Bogdana. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we will dominate the world market in this segment when hopefully the ceasefire is achieved and war ends. So there are areas where we excel and we lead the way, but of course there are highly sophisticated technologies. I mean, we're not going to start building F-35s in Ukraine anytime soon, right? But what can happen is we can be included in the production chain, and we can produce some stuff here in Ukraine that will be used for, you know what I mean? So we need to be part of the ecosystem. That's the whole objective right now.
So basically, we in a visible future, we may become not only a consumer. We're not a consumer anymore, but at some parts, as you said, but also a provider to the world.
Well, absolutely, and not just military technology, but dual-use technology as well. Because I am personally involved in certain scenarios where, for example, the American police force is looking at our solutions that we deploy on the battlefield, but they're using those solutions, or at this stage they have plans to use those solutions to help them police rock concerts and political events and, LGBT parades, because the drone technology is very accessible to bad people. So the American police force, for example, wants to understand how can they protect their citizens using the solutions that Ukrainians have invented in this tragic war on the battlefield. So there's a lot of things that we can give to our partners at this stage. And partners, we have become not just the recipients of aid, and they are not just our donors. We position ourselves now as equal partners because there's a lot we can give to them that will benefit their own security.
Yuriy, after 4 years of a full-scale invasion, I've heard a lot of insights from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Nataliia. Thank you so much.